Billionaire fired black waitress without warning. Hours later, he apologized. She had worked the lunch shift 1,000 times before, carrying plates and fake smiles through a world that barely saw her. But that afternoon, in a glittering rooftop restaurant owned by one of the richest men in the city, everything changed in a single, humiliating moment. No warning, no explanation, just a powerful billionaire, a black waitress, and a decision that shattered her livelihood in front of a room full of silent witnesses. Hours later, he called her back-shaking. What he discovered in those missing hours broke him and exposed something far uglier than a simple firing. By 11 a.m., the rooftop restaurant was already humming with quiet luxury. Glass walls, white tablecloths, a skyline view that made guests feel above the world. For Maya, it was just another shift black apron tied tight, hair pinned back, shoes already aching. She had been here for 3 years. No scandals, no complaints, just long hours, polite smiles, and the constant pressure of knowing one mistake could cost more than her tips. Her paycheck kept her younger brother in school and helped cover her mother's medications. She could not afford to slip. The place belonged to Leonard Hale, a billionaire celebrated on magazine covers for his vision and philanthropy. His face was everywhere. Paired with words like opportunity and equality, Maya had never spoken to him. To him, she was just part of the background, another blackface in a staff photo, another name on a schedule. She had learned to navigate the small cuts, being passed over for the best tables, watched a little closer when cash was involved, praised for being surprisingly professional, nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to and name, just enough to remind her where she stood. That afternoon, the staff whispered that Hal himself was coming in with important guests. Extra inspections, extra tension. Everything had to be perfect. Maya straightened cutlery and wiped invisible fingerprints from glasses, telling herself it was just another day. She didn't know that within hours, this ordinary shift would end with her standing in the middle of the dining room. Stripped of her job, her dignity challenged not by a mistake she made, but by a truth this place had never wanted to face. The lunch rush began like a slow wave. First came the suits with their leather briefcases, then the polished couples who ordered sparkling water and barely touched the bread, the air filled with the quiet clink of silverware and the low murmur of important conversations. Not today. Maya moved through it all on autopilot, balancing plates, reading faces, remembering orders without writing them down. It was the kind of invisible skill no resume ever captured. Her section was usually the corner tables, steady, safe, forgettable. That morning, the manager called the staff, together with unusual intensity. Everything about his tightened jaw and clipped instructions made it clear. This lunch was different. The owner himself, Leonard Hale, was bringing investors, people whose signatures could change the entire future of the restaurant group. Extra polishing, extra scrutiny, extra rules. When the seating chart went up, Maya saw it. Her name beside the table reserved for Hale and his guests. A prime spot in the center of the room, the one every server knew could make or break a month in Tipsif. Nothing went wrong. A younger white server nearby glanced at the chart and then at Maya, eyes lingering a second too long, as if silently questioning the choice. The message was unspoken but clear. Maya would have to be twice as perfect to be seen as simply good. When Hallie arrived, the mood shifted. Staff straightened, conversations softened. He walked in with the ease of someone used to being the most powerful man in any room. Cameras occasionally caught him in charity photo ops, shaking hands with workers in kitchens he didn't remember walking through. Now, he barely glanced at the people refilling his water. His guests settled in expensive suits, louder laughs, the kind of comfort that came from never being told no. One of them, a silver-haired man with a heavy watch that flashed under the lights, watched Maya in a way that made her shoulders stiffen, not openly hostile, just measuring. Service started smoothly. She poured wine with a steady hand, timed courses perfectly, anticipated needs before anyone had to ask. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel something dangerous in this place: pride. Then, midway through the main course, the temperature shifted. Maya sensed it before she understood it, the sudden silence at Hale's table, the way all their eyes seemed to narrow and turn in the same direction. The manager appeared at her side within seconds, his face pale, his voice low and urgent, as he told her there was a problem at the owner's table. One of the guests was missing an expensive item. He insisted it had been on the table moments earlier. The only person who had been close enough to touch it, they said, was her. In an instant, everything she had done right that day meant nothing. She was led away from the dining room, through the swinging doors, into the back, past coworkers who suddenly found reasons to look anywhere but at her. In a cramped office, she stood while a supervisor and security asked pointed questions, the kind that assumed the answer long before they were spoken. They asked about her shift, her route, her bills, her need for money. They did not ask if it hurt to be the only one suspected. They did not stop to consider that someone else had been near the table. No one mentioned that other servers, all white, had moved through that same space without being pulled aside. They searched her pockets, apron, bag, nothing. Silence followed, heavy and disbelieving not of her innocence, but of the inconvenience of it. The missing item was still gone. The rich man was still angry, and Leonard Hale was not a man used to leaving his guests unsatisfied. Back out in the dining room, the story was already being shaped without her. A misunderstanding was becoming a certainty. An accusation was becoming a narrative. To protect a relationship with wealth and power, someone else would have to pay. Minutes later, Maya was called back out not to return to work, but to be made an example. In front of diners, in the middle of the polished floor she had walked 1,000 times, her employment was stripped away in a few short, cold sentences. No investigation, no second chance. Just a decision delivered with the casual finality of someone swatting away a minor inconvenience. She stood there, heart pounding, as faces turned toward her. Some looked curious, some uncomfortable, some satisfied, but none spoke up. No one asked if this was fair. No one asked why the only black server in the room was the one being walked out by security. She left the restaurant carrying nothing but the small bag she had arrived with and a humiliation that felt too heavy to hold. Behind her, service resumed. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose again. But high above the dining room, in a locked office where no guests ever went, tiny red lights blinked on a row of security monitors. The real story of that lunch, the one no one bothered to check before destroying her career, was already there, captured from multiple angles, waiting for someone with power to decide whether the truth mattered more than appearances. The hours after she was marched out blurred into a numb, gray tunnel. On the crowded bus home, Maya stared at her reflection in the window and saw only the moment security had closed in on her. The disbelief on a stranger's face, the tiny flinch of a coworker who stepped back, as if whatever accusation hung in the air might be contagious. Her phone buzzed with messages she could not open. Rent due in 10 days, her brother's tuition, her mother's medication. All of it suddenly hanging by a thread she had not cut. Back at the restaurant, the story took on a different shape. The furious guest was talking about lawyers and reputations. A watch worth more than Maya made in a year was missing. And he was describing the humiliation of being robbed in a place this exclusive. For Leonard Hale, it was no longer just an incident. It was a potential scandal attached to his name. His legal team moved quickly, not out of concern for Maya, but to protect the brand. Standard protocol, they said. Review every camera angle, reconstruct every moment. Not for her sake, just in case police or press ever came knocking. In a darkened office, the footage played. Multiple screens, multiple angles. There was the table, there was the watch, glinting on the linen. There was Maya moving in and out of frame, focused, efficient, never once reaching near it. Then, on a side camera, almost no one ever checked, something else appeared. The guest, distracted, laughing at a joke, slipped the watch from his wrist and absent-mindedly tucked it into his own inner pocket before standing. Minutes later, on another angle, he was patting his wrist in outrage, already certain of who to blame. Hale watched himself enter the frame soon after. Commanding, unquestioning, already decided, no pause, no doubt, no effort to consider any possibility that did not end with a black waitress as the culprit. His chest tightened as the truth settled over him. There had been no thief, only an assumption. And he had torn a woman's life apart to serve it. In the silence of that office, with the evidence looping on repeat, his hand shook as it reached for her file. The apology he was about to make would not just reveal what he thought of her. It would reveal what he really was when the cameras were finally pointed at him. Maya almost let the unknown number go to voicemail. She lay on her narrow bed, uniform still on, staring at the ceiling as the phone buzzed again and again. She finally answered, more out of exhaustion than hope. On the other end, the billionaire who had barely seen her that morning now spoke with a strain she had never heard in his polished interviews. His words tumbled out in fragments camera footage. Mistake. The watch. The guest's pocket. No theft at all. He said her name like it was something fragile he might drop. He said he was sorry. Deeply, personally, profoundly sorry. He offered her the job back, a promotion, back pay, extra compensation. He talked about how unacceptable it all was, how this was not who he was, not what his brand stood for. His legal team had already drafted statements. The guest would be quietly banned. The narrative would be corrected. Listening, Maya felt something stranger than anger, distance. He had seen 20 minutes of footage and suffered a few hours of discomfort. She had walked through a dining room full of eyes that had watched her be treated like a criminal, and those minutes would stretch across the rest of her life. She agreed to come back not to work, but to face him. In a private meeting, surrounded by polished wood and city views, he handed her documents and a check that made her breath catch. He apologized again in front of senior staff. They looked relieved, not for her, but for the crisis closing. She kept the money. She did not keep the job. Later, when a carefully worded statement appeared online, calling the incident an unfortunate misunderstanding, her name was left out entirely. The brand was protected. The billionaire was praised for doing the right thing. But in the quiet corners of the city, in kitchens and break rooms and buses, workers told the story differently. They saw what it really was, a black woman's livelihood treated as disposable the moment a rich man pointed a finger. Maya's life did not end that day, but something in her trust did. She moved on to another job, another restaurant, carrying an invisible weight each time a manager looked her up and down, each time a guest patted a pocket, each time security cameras blinked overhead, but no one thought to use them before judgment fell. Her case was rare only in one way. The truth was caught on tape, and a powerful man actually watched it. She got a call back. She got an apology. How many others never do? How many stories of suspicion and misunderstanding are really just this same script, played out without cameras, without consequences, without a billionaire forced to see his own reflection? The next time a headline calls it a simple mistake, remember Maya and ask yourself whose life paid the price for someone else's comfort.